The J-35XS Draken is a Swedish premium jet in War Thunder. Is it worth the price? Let's find out. The original Saab Draken was a Swedish jet fighter designed and built in the mid-1950s that entered regular service in 1960. It demonstrated amazing capabilities, was continually upgraded over time, and it wasn't fully retired until 2005, with Austria being the last user. Starting in the early 70s, Finland showed interest and started using the Draken under the designation J-35S. The Finns had a different naming convention and called it the Saab 35DK. Well, the Drakens used by Finland were a combination of formerly Swedish jets and also some parts kit aircraft assembled in Finland under a deal arranged to try and help develop maintenance expertise with the plane locally. In Finnish service, there were four main models: the Saab 35XS, FS, BS, and CS. The first two being dedicated fighters, while the latter two were two-seat trainers. Uniquely, the Draken was fitted out with a combination of Eastern and Western weapon systems by Finland, with examples flying weapons such as the American Sidewinder, the American AIM-4 Falcon, and the Soviet R-13 air-to-air missiles. The planes were also upgraded over time to include additional hardpoints, countermeasures, and more modern electronic systems. The XS model was basically a J-35F, which had an upgraded radar installation with a new infrared search and track unit and significantly better radio equipment in addition to the extra weapon pylons. Notably, one of the cannons was removed to make room for some additional avionics equipment. Finland flew a total of 36 Drakens from 1972 all the way up into the year 2000. What we get in War Thunder is the J-35XS, a premium jet fighter in rank 7 of the Swedish air tree at a battle rating of 10.7. This jet is currently only available through a pack on the web store. The plane gets the PS-011A radar set and the N-71 IRST unit. The radar set is relatively basic. It's got a couple of dish angles and range presets on the scope, but generally no advanced features. Its IRST is similar to the one carried by the MiG-23, and it provides basically the same functionality. It's a passive sensor that uses the C-scope display, and it detects engine heat from other aircraft. You also get a ballistics computer for the cannon and unguided rockets. One notable omission is that the plane does not have a radar warning receiver. Now, it's worth mentioning that the jet gets a couple of ammo belts for its cannon, but none of them have any tracers, so get good at firing blind. For loadouts, you get a combination of air-to-air missiles and unguided rockets carried over 8 pylons. 2 of the pylons can only carry missiles, and 2 of the others can only carry rockets, but all of the others are mixed use, so you can create some multi-role weapon loadouts if you want to. The air-to-air missile it gets is the RB-24J. This is a Swedish version of the AIM-9P3 Sidewinder. It's a rear aspect heat seeker with 20 Gs of pull, reasonable range, and pretty average overall performance. This might not be the best missile in the game, but it's generally good enough, and you'll get plenty of kills with it. In terms of flight performance, the J-35XS, like the regular tech tree J-35, is in a class of its own, with some really unique capabilities, but also some unique limitations. In terms of speed, the plane's acceleration is at least average, and it can punch through Mach 1 pretty easily at low altitudes. It has a solid rate of climb, and a comparable maximum speed to other jets at the top tiers. Its real claim to fame, though, is its limited degree of supermaneuverability. In short, the J-35XS, along with the other Drakens that Sweden gets access to, can convert speed into directional change better than basically every other fighter currently in the game. This gives the plane the capability to perform some absolutely amazing UFO turns in air combat. The problem is, if you pull one of these insane turns for more than a second or two, or if you get into a twisting fight with them, your airspeed just vanishes. And before you know it, the plane's just hanging in the air, waiting to stall. Well, the J-35's acceleration isn't usually enough to make up for that without at least a good 5 to 8 seconds of level flight regaining lost speed, so it can occasionally be an issue if you're not careful. The best speed range for pulling off the crazy high angle of attack turns seems to be somewhere between about 700 and 900 kilometers an hour. But you also need to keep something important in mind: your pilot. Even with a fully upgraded expert or ace pilot, you're going to be blacking out very quickly flying the Draken if you snap this thing into crazy 10G high AOA turns, and what starts off as a good reversal on some other plane might end up with your blacked out pilot sitting there wondering what's going on as some other plane with an inferior turning circle is cutting in on him. So be careful and upgrade your pilot. While the plane doesn't have combat or landing flaps, it does have a pretty good air brake, which can be useful in controlling your speed in a dive or on landing. Flying the J-35XS into air battles can be an enormous amount of fun, but there's also a pretty big learning curve. And since this is a premium, similar to the J-35A before it, a lot of inexperienced pilots might pick this thing up and wonder what the hell is going on when they fly it out into matches. The first thing to consider is the BR range. The plane is at 10.7, which means that it can be pulled down and go seal clubbing against like MiG-19s and F-3H2s, but it can also get up-tiered into getting clubbed out by F-16s and MiG-29s. At 10.7 or lower, the plane is very well positioned, and you can dominate most one-on-one engagements. Avoiding BVR spam won't really be as big of an issue, and you can use your IRST sensor to be a little bit more sneaky if you want, since it's a passive system. Try to pick fights with targets off on their own, and don't be afraid to get into a close-up gunfight. Even though the cannon is difficult to aim, the plane can get a firing angle on basically anything at close range, and stuff like A-10s or F-4s are going to be particularly easy targets. Now, if you get up-tiered, it's an entirely different story, and you're going to need to be flying a lot more defensively during the opening phase of a match. I suggest trying to stay with your team and avoid going off on your own, so it's a bit harder for enemy fighters to single you out in a BVR weapon shot. The supply of countermeasures is very limited, and you don't get a radar warning receiver, so you're not exactly defenseless, but you're at a pretty high disadvantage, and you need to adjust your tactics accordingly. Also, in all game modes, you're going to have to watch your fuel consumption, because this plane has a really thirsty engine if you fly around with the afterburner on. In terms of ground attack and close air support, well, the plane can take some unguided rockets, but it's not really well suited for ground pounding. You can sometimes get a kill or two with the rockets in ground battles, but for my 5 cents, just try to stick to air combat. It's really what this plane is best at. Visually, I'm really digging the Draken. It's got that weird angular shape that just appeals to me. The gold marketplace skin is pretty cool looking, and while everybody else calls this thing the Flying Dorito, to me it always looked like a kite, and frankly, it's kind of badass. Landing the J-35 is easy, but with 2 caveats. It has a very short set of landing gear, so be careful not to tail strike. And if you're not paying attention, it's actually kind of easy to dump too much speed on final approach without enough room to get it back. Remember, this thing loses speed much quicker than it builds it up. Otherwise, air brakes and drag chute, so pretty basic landing profile. The cockpit on this plane is beautifully detailed, with good forward and side visibility, but no heads-up display, iffy rearward visibility, and the radar scope is too small and too low for my personal preference. In fact, most of the instruments are lower than I like, but otherwise I'd rate this as a pretty average cockpit. To close out on the J-35XS. This jet has a degree of supermaneuverability, a good quantity of weapons, it gets an IRST, which is always a huge plus, and it gets premium bonuses. However, no radar warning receiver, limited countermeasures, no tracers for its cannon, singular tense, and its afterburner is thirsty, and it can run out of fuel easily if you're not careful. Oh, and it's very expensive. The final verdict on the premium J-35XS is that this jet is an absolute beast in one-on-one dogfights, but its poor defensive systems and steep learning curve might be frustrated for inexperienced players who buy it. Speaking of which, it's insanely expensive, so you've got to really want this thing. Still, it's probably my personal favorite of the Rank 7 premiums. As always, thanks for watching.